Hello again. We are still talking about intimacy in devised theater spaces, and we are also still talking about ritual as a tool for intimacy in devised theater spaces. We talked about the ritual of tapping in and tapping out, and therefore creating a space where you can work on intimate and vulnerable material. So now we are going to talk about how we can use ritual to create intimate and vulnerable material. So, as I mentioned previously, one of the things that's important about ritual is that it's repeatable. Just because we repeat something doesn't mean it's the same every time, and that's part of its inherent vulnerability. We can initiate something, but that doesn't mean we know how it's going to end. And as we're building and creating material, devising material for to be perceived, one, we never know how it's going to be perceived. So just any introduction of ritual at all is kind of a risk, because once people realize, oh, that's a ritual, they're going to have their own preconceived ideas about rituals in general. Like if we're telling a story about religious practice, people come with all sorts of religious baggage. So yeah, it's a little scary to share that, because it's something most of the time we do in public or private. I know what I meant. It's something that, like, most people tend to think of religion as something you practice in private. So when you take it onto a stage or into a performance space or in a performative space, there's the risk of people having some kind of big feelings about that. So in this project that I was in conversation with, we had conversations about ritual. There wasn't much practice of ritual. There was, however, some use of object ritual. Now, one of the offerings I had brought to them, which was brought much too late to really be useful, it involved object ritual. And I invited them to encounter an object in space and to transform that object through an intimate act. And the transformation could have been to elevate it, or it could have been to make it or to debase it. That's the word, debase. But either way, it had to happen through ritual, and that ritual was going to hit the hallmark of being repeatable, because that was the next one of the directions that was given in this exercise. And I also invited them to view it in the micro and the macro. I can talk, I promise. And just see how those different perceptions changed it. There were a few other ingredients to that exercise, but the point was, encounter the object, transform it, repeat it, and make it small, make it big. And the explorations were interesting. The transformation of somebody's dirty hoodie was fascinating. But really, what was most fascinating was how they took that information and transferred it to their use of an object in their final piece, where they had a journal. And the interesting thing about a journal is it's inherently intimate. You don't have to do much to transform it. It's elevated all on its own by virtue of the fact that somebody's writing their private and personal thoughts and feelings into it. So it was an inherently intimate object for one character in the show. But then they also transformed it as a gateway to another time period. So every time that journal opened, whether it was to be written in or read from, and whether it was being read from by the owner of the journal or another character, which is, again, an intimate thing because it's a violation of somebody's privacy, it became an intimate ritual object for the audience, because the audience knew every time that journal opened, they were going to be transported to another time. And so seeing the different layers that this one object could be used ritually to create these moments of intimacy, especially because the business that happened in the historical sections of the show were some of the most heightened and most physically intimate. It was so cool. Yeah. So ritual can build intimacy, it can communicate intimacy, and it is inherently intimate. So it is a really exciting and fun tool in the devised space.